We'll start with Ken, who's known Phil for almost a decade. And he'll start us off in remembering Phil.
It's a lot of people. Hi everyone, I'm Ken. As Christine said, like pretty much everyone here, I was a close friend of Phil's. I was also given the honor of officiating he and Carla's wedding, which I think is why Carla asked me to speak today. Sorry, gotta lose the glasses. At my wife's memorial last year, I had the experience many times of seeing close friends and loved ones that I hadn't seen in a long time. I got to tell them how wonderful it was to see them. It just sucked it was for such a shitty reason. So thanks for being here, everybody. It's really nice to see y'all. I just wish it wasn't for such a shitty reason. I first met Phil through Matt. They were roommates about a dozen years ago. Matt and I had a long-standing gaming group, and every now and then we would play at Matt's house, and there I would encounter Phil. He'd be all dressed up and heading down to the Catalyst to pick up chicks. He'd give us crap about what geeks we were, and how he was going off to meet actual girls. And then he'd hang out on the staircase, looking down longingly at our game, which he secretly desired to be part of. He did eventually find his way to the group for a short time, but then he met Carla and he liked her better. It was through my relationship with my wife Shannon, however, that I really got close to Phil. Shannon and Phil knew each other a lot longer than I knew either of them, and they were quite close. Many years back, a close friend of mine broke up with her fiancé. It so happened at the time I was dating her best friend, so the three of us were spending a lot of time together. When she was recovering from the loss of her relationship, it fell to me to be the man in her life. Spending time with her, comforting her, cuddling when needed, etc. So I referred to myself as her surrogate boyfriend because, with the exception of sex, I was pretty much filling that role. So Shannon was Phil's surrogate girlfriend. Over the years, whenever Phil was down, Shannon was there to spend time with him, to comfort him, to hold him whenever he needed it, which meant that I too was spending a lot of time with Phil and was lucky enough to become a member of the bromance group, which is what we're calling ourselves today. Many an adventure was had with Phil, usually involving a drink or several, and inevitably would end up with, "I love you, man." When Shannon passed, Phil was one of the many who, even though he was grieving the loss of his dear friend, he made himself available to me 24/7 for anything I needed, which was usually a shoulder to cry on, which he always gave me, usually shedding into some tears himself. And then Phil met Carla. As I mentioned, I was honored to be the officiant of their wedding. And when Phil met Carla, he was a new man. He was happier than I had ever seen him, constantly smiling, beaming, and very, very present. So Carla, I know your time with him was way too short, but I want to thank you for giving Phil the happiest time that I'd ever seen him in the dozen years that I knew him. So I have something to read here. It's from the book On Life After Death by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, as many of you know, was considered the premier scientist on the process of death and dying in the 20th century. In this book, Dr. Ross explains that when she started studying this process, she herself was a scientist and a skeptic. And through the hundreds and hundreds of cases that she studied, she became certain that there's divinity in all of us and that there is an afterlife. So I wanted to read this story about one of her most dramatic stories. My most dramatic and unforgettable case of a near-death experience was a man who was in the process of being picked up by his entire family for Memorial Day weekend drive to visit some relatives out of town. While driving the family van to pick him up, his parents-in-law with his wife and 8 children were hit by a gasoline tanker. The gasoline poured over the car and burned his entire family to death. After being told what happened, the man remained in a state of total shock and numbness for several weeks. He stopped working and was unable to communicate. To make a long story short, he became a total bum, drinking half a gallon of whiskey a day, trying heroin and other drugs to numb his pain. He was unable to hold a job for any length of time and ended up literally in the gutter. It was during one of my hectic traveling tours the man appeared in my audience. Instead of being a bum as he had described himself, he was a rather well-dressed, very sophisticated man. He went up on stage, and without having a need to evaluate him, I encouraged him to tell the audience what he needed to share. He told how he had been looking forward to the weekend family reunion, how his entire family had piled into the family van and were on their way to pick him up when this tragic accident occurred. He shared the shock and numbness, the utter disbelief of suddenly being a single man, of having had children and suddenly becoming childless, of living without a single close relative. He told of his total inability to come to grips with it. He shared how he changed from a money-earning, decent middle-class husband and father to a total bum, drunk every day from morning to night, using every conceivable drug and trying to commit suicide in every conceivable way, yet never able to succeed. His last recollection was that after 2 years of literally bumming around, he was lying on a dirt road at the edge of a forest, drunk and stoned, as he called it, trying desperately to be reunited with his family. Not wanting to live, not even having the energy to move out of the road when he saw a big truck coming toward him and running him over. It was at this moment that he watched himself in the street, critically injured, while he observed the whole scene of the accident from a few feet above. It was at this moment that his family appeared in front of him in a glow of light with an incredible sense of love. They had happy smiles on their faces and simply made him aware of their presence, not communicating in any verbal way, but in the form of thought transference, sharing with him the joy and happiness of their present existence. The man was not able to tell us how long this reunion lasted. He was so awed by his family's health, their beauty, their radiance, and their total acceptance of this present situation by their unconditional love. He made a vow not to touch them, not to join them, but to re-enter his physical body so that he could share with the world what he had experienced. It would be a form of redemption for his 2 years of trying to throw his physical life away. It was after this vow that he watched the truck driver carry his totally injured body into a car. He saw an ambulance speeding to the scene of the accident. He was taken to the hospital's emergency room, and he finally re-entered his physical body, tore off the straps that were tied around him, and literally walked out of the emergency room. He never had any delirium tremens or any after effects from the heavy abuse of drugs and alcohol. He felt healed and whole and made a commitment that he would not die until he had the opportunity of sharing the existence of life after death with as many people as would be willing to listen. It was after reading a newspaper article about my appearance in Santa Barbara that he sent a message to the auditorium. By allowing him to share with my audience, he was able to keep the promise he made at the time of his short, temporary, yet happy reunion with his entire family. Obviously, over the last 18 months, I've had a lot of time to think about this sort of thing, and I have come to the conclusion that I have absolutely no doubt that Phil is well, that he's at peace, and that he has loved ones guiding him, including his dear surrogate girlfriend, who I have no doubt is holding him and loving him and helping him with his transition. So thank you, Shannon, for looking after Phil. And thank you, Phil, for the years of terrific memories and for being part of my life. I'm going to miss you terribly, but I look forward to however far off in the future it may be when we can all hang out and be reunited again. Thank you.